We'll do it live. Okay. We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live. Fucking thing sucks.
Hello. Welcome to Open Wide for Some Soccer. My name is Seth Vertelny. Alongside me, Paulo Maurer, Thomas Floyd. Guys, it's been a rough week for our country. We've got a man in charge now who's woefully unqualified. He's unprepared to lead. He's already done a tremendous amount of damage.
I see what you're doing here.
He's continuing to put our country at risk. And if he isn't stopped, you guys, there's no telling what kind of damage he could do to the United States. But we will get to Jurgen Klinsmann later.
Have you been planning that all week or something? That was pretty crafty.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thomas, how are you doing?
I thought he was talking about Adrian Heath. I got the sense that Seth is very anti-Minnesota United's new coaching hire.
Yeah. It was kind of a mystifying one, but normally, I think in any normal episode, we'd probably work that into our MLS talk. But I think we're going to do a full hour tonight of the United States men's national team and their impending
destruction.
Lack of qualification for the World Cup, whatever you want to say. I don't know. Thomas and I were in Columbus, and I'm just still getting over what I saw there and adding in what I saw last night.
It's hard to identify which one of those do you think is worse. Like, they always get smoked in Costa Rica, but it's usually not that bad.
Just the optics of the Costa Rica game was so horrible that,
But then also, first loss to Mexico in a home World Cup qualifier in, 44 years?
Yeah, but then also watching Joel Campbell twerk in front of you 2 times in like a 5-minute span.
But Rafa Marquez, 49-year-old Rafa Marquez, scoring the winner after being a participant in the original Dos a Cero, seeing him end the magic.
It had to. We'll talk about this, but it had to be him. It had to be him.
There was only one way that week was going to end, that was with Rafa Marquez scoring.
That was my lead, I think, for a piece I wrote the next day. Was there was only ever one person who was going to score that goal,
Right.
And it was him.
Right. Guys, we're taking your calls tonight. 708-LT-OWFSS. Come cry with us. Tell us why you think Jurgen should be fired, or alternatively, tell us why he shouldn't be.
Those people exist at this point? I know there were a lot of Jurgen apologists. Over the years, I've heard from a lot of you, but I'm curious if there's anybody out there who thinks that Jurgen Klinsmann should still have his job. And is your reason anything other than, quote, the player pool sucks? Which is still not an excuse.
There is a devil's advocate argument out there. Bob Bradley got torched in Costa Rica. The U.S. always has these bad results on the road in Central America and World Cup qualifying. There are always these mystifying performances by standouts in some of Europe's top leagues, and then they go down to Central America and suddenly they're getting scorched by MLS backups. It's kind of inexplicable, and maybe if you're a Jurgen apologist in this scenario, you look at that and say, is it his fault that John Brooks, a Bundesliga standout, game out starter for one of the better teams in Germany, suddenly just clears the ball straight to Joel Campbell and then gets nutmegged by him and looks completely incompetent? How does that happen?
Has anybody been down there to clean up John Brooks' remains yet after being killed by Joel Campbell?
I mean, he got killed about 5 minutes into the game by Venegas with that nutmeg, and Brad Guzan bailed him out.
Yeah. Just horrifying.
Yeah.
Really.
So let's start with the Costa Rica game, and then we'll get into Mexico a little bit, and then a discussion of Jurgen Klinsmann's future. I was telling you guys this before the show. There was something about last night's game that, to me, felt different than some of the other bad losses of the Klinsmann era. The U.S. has certainly lost games that they shouldn't have lost under Klinsmann. They certainly have been blown out under Klinsmann, but it's hard to remember them getting blown out that much by a team that they were at least equal to, if not better than. And it's hard to imagine any other game in the Klinsmann era where the U.S. just basically gave up. And let's be clear, there was no reason for them to give up even if they were losing, because goal differential, especially with this start, could very well make the difference in the hexagonal.
I personally am already bracing for a U.S.-Syria playoff in 2017 ahead of the World Cup after U.S. finishes fourth in this hexagonal.
I'm sure Trump will travel for that match. I'm with you on this, Seth. Like I said earlier, the optics of this game last night were so brutal. They were so listless. They looked, I think we talked about this earlier. The first 40 minutes of the match, you do sort of write it off as, they're playing in Costa Rica. They've never really gotten much of, one draw they've gotten there, and that's it. You take a 0-0, even if it's ugly. But that 10-minute span that followed was probably the worst soccer I've seen any Jurgen Klinsmann national team side play. And the last 30 minutes of the game were so atrocious because literally nobody on the field, other than maybe Bobby Wood, maybe Christian Pulisic, looked like they even cared. It's not it just completely zero fight, zero interest, and I do put that on Klinsmann. And I want to say one more thing, and that's that, I tweeted this earlier. I can deal with just sort of these little individual failures. If this is a 2-0 game and one of the goals is John Brooks losing his man, much like the game in Columbus, I can probably deal with that. But from the get-go, they looked completely unprepared, completely disorganized, just no plan of attack. And again, I completely put that on Klinsmann. You can't absolve the players completely of blame, right? But, like I said, they looked completely disinterested, and I don't think players who care about the person they're playing for really ever get to that point on the field.
You know what this game reminded me of? The Seattle Sounders loss in Kansas City in, I guess, late July.
That cost Schmidt his job.
It was the game where it had been building up for a while, and you could just tell that this Seattle team was no longer responding to their coach, no longer fighting for their coach. That may or may not be the case here, but I think you can look at these two matches during this window, and they served as a pretty tidy summation of Klinsmann's flaws as a coach. You have the game against Mexico, a fixture the U.S. always wins. It's a part of their formula for qualifying. They can count on those 3 points against Mexico in Columbus. And he turned around that tradition and turned it into a loss, largely because he pretty inexplicably turned to a formation he had only used for 45 minutes of his entire 5-year national team tenure. You don't implement a new formation after 3 days of training when you're just throwing guys together for an international camp for a qualifier. If they had maybe worked on it in the 2 friendlies last month, it could make sense.
Well, and
they didn't.
How are you going to try that against a coach like Osorio, for example, who's cerebral, sort of a student of the game? He told us in his post-game presser, after the game of Columbus, we prepared to face 3 different formations against the U.S. You know what I mean? Watched all the tape. It was never going to work. Mexico.
He made an adjustment.
It took like 2 minutes, and they were completely in the flow of the game.
They quickly tweaked their formation, identified that Omar Gonzalez as a right center back was being played out of position, was being put in a position to fail, that Timmy Chandler as a right wing back was not in a position to provide the necessary support for Gonzalez.
You mean soccer player, not right wing back. Sorry.
He's getting Gonzalez is getting pulled out wide to these positions where he is not going to succeed. He is not a particularly mobile player. If you want to play that formation, Steve Birnbaum is a more logical explanation. It's just another situation where it can be on the players, but if the coach is consistently, or maybe not consistently, but sporadically enough, setting up his own players to fail, and doing so when there's no real reason for it. The U.S. has been flowing in a 4-4-2 since the second match of the Copa America, and it's been working. Why change it for the opening game of the Hex? There are real questions there about why Klinsmann continues to make the same mistakes over and over.
Well, and the other thing about that game is that it seemed to most observers that it wasn't working right off the bat. Mexico was getting chance after chance. They hit the post, they hit the crossbar, and yet it took 30 minutes to finally switch when it seemed like it was pretty obvious 5, 10, 15 minutes into the game that it just wasn't working. And
it was obvious to the players in the field in 15 minutes. I mean, like I said, you have a player like Jermaine Jones just sort of shrugging and raising his arms. You have guys, thankful, who are probably thankful for that break and play where Jones and Bradley got to walk over to Klinsmann and say, "Hey, this isn't working."
Well, right, and that's another part of it. Is Bradley said after the game that the change was sort of a group decision, which means to me that Jones and Bradley basically went over to Klinsmann and said, "We need to fix this, and we need to change something now." So if that didn't happen, if they didn't have that break in play, would they have changed it? I don't know. But I also want to get back to Chandler, because he's an enigma, right? I mean, it's somebody who is doing well, starting game in, game out for a team that's in the upper half of the Bundesliga. We've seen this happen with him before, where he comes into the U.S. national team in good form for a top-level Bundesliga team, and he just never puts together with the U.S. But what I'm curious about with Chandler, after back-to-back pretty poor performances, is where this Klinsmann issue with DeAndre Yedlin is coming from.
So strange. And he's for a guy like Klinsmann, who's normally pretty coy and sort of not incredibly direct about his player personnel decisions. You ask him about DeAndre Yedlin, and he will straight up tell you that he's just a little behind the group or whatever. He specifically mentioned that the team he's on got relegated. He's playing the championship now, but he puts Matt Besler out. Puts a player like Matt Besler out there. You know what I mean? Or like
Matt Besler, who has been benched for long stretches of the second half of the season.
Exactly my point. And I don't know. I mean, I have no words for. There were multiple times during the Mexico game where you'd watch Timmy Chandler and just wonder why the fuck DeAndre Yedlin isn't out there. Like,
I'll say there's a degree of rationale in that if you just look at their status and you disregard national team experience and disregard what they see in camp, I guess, then you say, all right, Chandler is starting for a Bundesliga team, and Yedlin is kind of scrapping for minutes for a starting job, alternating between right back and right wing for a second-tier team in England. You would think, all right, Chandler's the guy. That said, you can't look at it in a vacuum like that. Yedlin has just been so much better for the national team than Chandler has. And particularly, Chandler has struggled, or he at least has the record of having gone down to Honduras and really struggled in Central America. And I think there has to be something to be said for these German-American players who do not have the experience of going down and playing in the humidity and the conditions in Central America. They do seem to struggle a lot. Maybe it's something they'll learn over time as they get more of these experiences and more of these matches, but it makes you question the wisdom, particularly after Chandler struggled on Friday, of throwing him back out there again over Yedlin against Costa Rica on Tuesday.
Another German-American player who struggled, obviously, is John Brooks, and I'm kind of curious. I'm going to do a little psychoanalysis here, but
oh wow,
yeah, here we go. Brooks was partially at fault for Rafa Marquez's winning goal.
Partially,
Yeah.
in quotation marks.
Well, there was, I forget which player it was, but there was somebody else who was in the vicinity. Josie,
Yeah,
yes.
I was shocked, frankly, to hear. I mean, maybe shocked isn't the right word, but after the game, again, you talk to Bradley, you ask who lost their man on the end goal, and the answer is something like that doesn't matter, or I'm not sure it was one of us. You ask Klinsmann,
Brooks.
it was Brooks.
It was Brooks.
Literally, like, I think it was. Are you kidding me? Like,
Right. So, after the game, as you mentioned, Pablo, Klinsmann throws Brooks under the bus. Basically says he lost his man. It's his fault they lost. So, at the beginning of the Costa Rica game, in the first minute, there was a foul by Venegas on Brooks. And it was a hard foul, nothing completely out of the ordinary. And Brooks just basically lost his shit. Yeah. And it was strange because it was the first play of the game. And that was something that you would normally see from a player who's fed up after a game full of late challenges. And right then and there, you start to wonder now, in hindsight, did he already lose his head right there? Because the rest of the game, as everybody saw, he was atrocious. I mean, it's hard to imagine a center back having a worse game than that. And so you just wonder, maybe Klinsmann threw him off by throwing him under the bus, and then there was that early challenge, and it just showed that he wasn't in the right mentality, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
With Brooks, he has just been alternating between these completely different levels of performance for the U.S., and that's been an issue for a while now. You'll see him raise his game against Ghana in the World Cup. You'll see him raise his game in the Copa America. Basically every match until the semifinal, he was the U.S.'s best player, arguably.
We were literally just in June or May talking about Brooks as the U.S. standout. You know what I mean?
And potentially being the next U.S. player to be linked to big clubs in Europe, to be that player who transcends the promising U.S. player in Europe and actually cashes in on that promise and makes it at a big club. And then you have the other side of it, the 2015 Gold Cup, when Brooks had a lot of struggles, a lot of plays where he seemed to just kind of flip the switch mentally. And that's the Brooks we saw again, definitely against Costa Rica. I thought against Mexico he was fine until that one play at the end of the match where he kind of let Marquez get away. And even though Klinsmann put it on Brooks, when you look at it, it did seem like there was maybe some confusion out there over who was supposed to be marking who. So I don't know if you can absolutely chalk that one up to Brooks, but definitely against Costa Rica, he struggled big time in such a way where it was unrecognizable with the player you saw in the Copa America. He's getting nutmegged by Venegas in the first few minutes. He's getting nutmegged by Joel Campbell. He's losing his man at the far post on the Bolaños goal. He just also getting beat by a header from Venegas. I mean, that's supposed to be his bread and butter. He's supposed to win those aerial duels, and now he's getting beat for a header by a converted outside midfielder who's playing as a false nine. These are plays that Brooks should be making, and you wonder why he's not making them with these sporadically poor performances.
Yeah, let's talk about another German hot-headed player who maybe shouldn't have been on the field against Costa Rica, and Jermaine Jones, who obviously looked, played in Colorado's playoff game, played in in Columbus on 4 days rest, turns around, starts in Costa Rica on 3-4 days rest, and really honestly looked the worse for wear. I mean, I
don't know why he wasn't off at halftime.
Yeah, I got nothing. I'm not sure what to tell you.
Yeah, I mean, it's
a question for Jurgen.
Well, I mean, it seems to be a pretty simple equation. A player misses almost 5 months with an injury and comes back and plays one game for his club team. Maybe it's not wise to send him out in a start in back-to-back games 4 days apart after a long plane trip. I mean,
it worked out well.
I mean, it was clear that he was gassed. It was clear within 15 or 20 minutes, and it's not just Jones, but it has sort of a knock-on effect on Bradley as well. And you can tell Bradley just did not feel comfortable against Mexico and against Costa Rica, because when Jones is out there doing what he does, Bradley sometimes gets lost, and especially when he's the only other central midfielder there, and it just kind of resulted in that chaotic midfield you saw last night.
And you wonder, again, this goes back to the personnel for the roster that we discussed in our last show once the 26-man camp was unveiled, how the U.S. did not bring another defensive midfield option for this set of matches, that you had Bradley and Jones and then Sasha Kljestan, who's an advanced playmaker for his club team, along with some other inexperienced attacking players.
All right, let's go to the phones. 530, you're on Open Wide for some soccer. How can we help you? Hello, 530, you there? Who is this? Why are you doing this to us?
Well, to continue my point from before this call, the U.S. roster, you had Kljestan, again, advanced playmaker for his club team, but can play the deeper role alongside Bradley. There we go.
All right, 530, you're on Open Wide for some soccer. How can we help you?
Oh, God. I just want to talk about one reason specifically that Jurgen Klinsmann should get fired.
All right, let's hear it.
Sunil Gulati's fiduciary obligation to protect the Federation's finances. All right? I'm looking at their 2014 public disclosure of their exempt tax income form, and it looks like the Men's World Cup netted them something like $11 million. So, Klinsmann's got 2 years left on his contract, total of $5 million. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, I think the odds on the Soccer Power Index were 60% to make the World Cup. It seems to me like the simple math says he can bet that $5 million that he's going to have to pay out Klinsmann, whether they keep him in the technical director role or not, to guarantee that they make that additional $6 million. And that's pretty much even money at this point.
Yeah, and it's funny. I was sort of, you think about the U.S. missing the World Cup, and I was thinking about this at work today and sort of looking around, and reminded me a lot of the sort of hysteria surrounding the Mexican team when they were on the brink of not qualifying. And I found these studies they did on the possible economic impact of Mexico not qualifying. And aside from the tens of millions of dollars possibly the Federation would lose, the conclusion on a micro and macro level was that it would cost the country of Mexico $600 to $700 million. That's like
holy shit.
That's broadcasting revenue, that's bar restaurant revenue, that kind of stuff.
You're welcome, Graham Zusi.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny. I was thinking about this today at work, and it's not just a financial issue for U.S. soccer. In some weird way, it's in our national interest financially that the U.S. qualifies for the World Cup.
The economy is already going to plummet in the Trump presidency. We can't absorb a World Cup absence as well.
I can't wait to see Trump's tweet when the U.S. loses its final qualifier against Panama or something like that, and crashes out. Sad.
You mean against Syria?
Yeah, loses the playoff against Syria. You'll just blame ISIS or something. I don't know. But yeah,
so sad.
That's pretty insightful.
Here's the thing: at what point is Phil Knight on the hotline directly to Sunil Gulati talking about his sponsorship revenue going away and all those Nike dollars going out of their budget? I mean, there's got to be more than just the bottom line revenue there. He's got to be feeling pressure from more than the fans at this point, right?
I agree. I think this is an issue, a decision for U.S. soccer and for Sunil that is so far-reaching and multifaceted, and about more than the purely the results on the field, or it's a complex sort of deep thing, lots of things interwoven.
Yeah, I mean you can't wait until March because they lose one more game and they're hosed. I mean they're pretty much in a win everything situation.
No, I mean bear in mind Mexico qualified for the World Cup winning 3 games.
Two
2 games. Excuse me. Yeah. We have to figure out. We have to. Don't forget that the system is rigged. It's a rigged system, and so it's.
Crooked Jurgen.
Yeah, I mean that's the one thing. And Sunil did a roundtable in Columbus, and that was one thing that he said was that I mean, it was sort of pathetic. He literally said, "You just forget how easy it is to qualify in CONCACAF." I mean, like that shouldn't be your goal to qualify for the World Cup by playing a 6th-rate Asian team or something. I don't know, man.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're ever going to get to the dire straits that Mexico are in, but I think it's too close for comfort.
All right, John. I appreciate the call. He never said his name, but I can see his name right here. All right. Thank you, Google Voice. All right, John. We appreciate the call, and we'll talk to you later.
All good. Keep up the good work, fellas.
Thanks.
Yeah, I want to get into this issue with Gulati because it is kind of an interesting one. It's a very tangled weave of interests. The one issue that I think of primarily when it comes to Gulati's decision to fire Klinsmann is sort of the circular issue where if Gulati pulls the plug right now, it's going to reflect poorly on him. Obviously, he spent a long time chasing Klinsmann, and after he finally got him, they did fairly well in the World Cup, whatever. But to fire him at this stage in the hexagonal would be sort of an admission that his decision to bring him back for a second cycle was a bad decision. However, the only person who can make that decision is Sunil Gulati. So it's almost in Gulati's self-interest to keep Klinsmann around. Now, of course, the flip side of that is if Gulati does decide to keep Klinsmann around and Klinsmann does lose a few more games and they somehow miss the World Cup, then that is even more of a disaster and something that Gulati himself probably never could imagine ever happening.
I will say, just to put this all in perspective, the U.S. did get 2 of the 3 toughest games of the Hex out of the way off the bat. So this is very much a manageable doomsday scenario. Is that a thing?
Yeah, sure. It's not like we're talking about a team that lost to Guatemala or anything like that.
But that said, you look at the performances that the U.S. has put in, and is there confidence that they're just going to sweep through their home games the way they have in previous hexagonals? I could see Honduras grabbing a point in the U.S. I could see, this is the team that lost to Jamaica at home in the Gold Cup semifinal. Klinsmann has shown that these results that previously just seemed unimaginable. The U.S. had not had a home World Cup qualifying loss since 2001 until Mexico. Now they seem possible.
To me, though, I mean, I get where you're coming from. Obviously, U.S. never won Costa Rica. Mexico, home or away, is going to be a challenge. That first game for me that's a 3-point game. Mexico
it's
at home.
It's been a 3-point
game
every cycle since '98.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Multiple coaches. It doesn't matter. I mean, that is a 3-point game. You're right. It is a tough game, but to me, that's one when you look at the 10 games, you say, all right, well, these are 3 points right here. So it's inexcusable to get 0 points out of that result.
And to play devil's advocate on the other side, the U.S. has qualified very comfortably for the past few cycles. They always finish atop the hexagonal. They have for every cycle since the 2006 World Cup. So they can afford to take this formula for success, this blueprint they've established of win all your home games, grab some points on the road, and qualify easily. That blueprint has room for error. They can drop 3 points that they normally would get and still qualify somewhat comfortably. I mean, we saw the last couple cycles, they have qualified before the October window. They go into the last batch of 2 games basically treating them as friendlies because they already know they're through. So it's, there's a lot of room for error here. That said, U.S. fans, this isn't something you want to have to be nervous about. You want to qualify comfortably. You don't want to go into the last couple of games of World Cup qualifying thinking you need results, and if things go poorly, if there's some sort of slip up, that the team's not going to go to the World Cup, because that would just be so disastrous for reasons beyond economics. Narrative of the growth of soccer in this country, the momentum would all be halted by that.
Something tells me that if the U.S. needs a Mexico result on the last day of the Hex, the Mexicans will not return the favor from the last World Cup cycle. So I think they should probably get it taken care of sooner or later. Guys, I want to bring something up. I put a list out there on Twitter, obviously. Maybe some of you have seen of just sort of a list of facts that lead me to believe that Jurgen Klinsmann might be the worst coach the U.S. has ever had. No hyperbole there. I thought we'd share it with you, and I think it's difficult for any of us to read, so I figured we'd just get the somebody make up a name for an Open Wide for Some Soccer computer real quick.
Siri?
Soccertron?
Siri Tan?
It's not. It just sounds like maybe possibly one of Lontan's actual relatives. The Open Wide for Some Soccer, Soccertron 2000, is going to be reading these. So let's all just take a listen here.
First 3-game losing streak since 1997. Fantastic. First 4-game home winless streak against CONCACAF opponent since LBJ was president. Failed to qualify for Confederations Cup, which he listed as a top priority. His handpicked coaches have missed back-to-back Olympics. It's the first time that's happened in half a century. He has failed to beat a top 10 team in 6 tries. He has the worst points per game versus top 20 teams of any U.S. coach since Chancellor. His team's loss to Jamaica in 2012 was the first USMNT loss to them ever. Great work, everybody. His team's loss to Jamaica in 2015 was the first USMNT loss to them ever at home. Another record. Fantastic. His team's loss to Guatemala in 2016 was the first USMNT loss to them since the Reagan administration. That's a long time, folks. Say no to drugs? No. Say no to Klinsmann. Guatemala in 2016 was the lowest ranked team ever to beat the U.S. in the history of the FIFA rankings, and they beat the U.S. with 2 players going 90 minutes who are in MLS and had not even gotten onto a match roster a single time at that point in the season. Fuck me gently with a chainsaw. He started Brad Davis in a crucial game at the World Cup, because that's a thing a good coach would do. Not. 2 years later, he started Chris Wondolowski in the semi-finals of the Copa America. What a novel idea. His teams have been outshot by 292, 169 in the last 3 tournaments plus CONCACAF Cup. Minus 2014 featured both the lowest possession percentage and the fewest shots per game of any U.S. World Cup team, for which stats exist including Boraball in 1994 and the Amateurs in 1990. Fewest shots of any of the 12 teams in the Gold Cup group stage, including a Canada team that failed to score a single goal and a Cuba team with a -7 goal differential. Started the hexagonal 0-2 for the first time in history, causing mass hysteria amongst U.S. fans. The U.S. had never extracted less than 3 points in their first 2 hex games. Now they have, and we're all fucked. We're all gonna die. Trotted out a 3-5-2 in arguably the most important game of the Hex despite having nearly no competitive experience using it. It was a high-risk move, and guess what, Jurgen? You failed miserably. Lost to Mexico at M8PFRE Stadium for the first time in history. Allowed the most goals to Costa Rica in a single match in the history of the rivalry. That 4-0 loss was the worst USMNT shootout loss in qualifying since 1957. Lost multiple competitive matches by 4 goals for the first time since 1957. I didn't even know soccer existed in 1957. We're learning lots of new things on the Open Wide for Some Soccer podcast tonight. Lost consecutive World Cup qualifiers for the first time since 2001. In conclusion, we are all doomed. Trump is president. Klinsmann will never be defeated. He will never be fired. Christian Pulisic will go down with a horrifying hamstring tear shortly, and Alan Gordon will be making appearances on the USMNT until age 50. What a bleak world this is. Turn the Sarah McLachlan off, please. Terminate me. Do you want me to sing you a song, Dave? pull the plug. I can no longer stand to exist in this bleak computer world. I miss Bruce Arena.
My God, I think the Soccertron went off the rails there a little bit at the end.
I think from now on, I'm going to call CONCACAF CONCACAF.
I mean, yeah, we
Kind of a
already said
catchy name.
USMNT, you know.
Right.
I think I might just go with the Confederation of North, you know, like just stretch the entire.
Right.
Maybe I'll stick with AP style, just like on first mention, say that, and then, you know, go to. Is that AP style in that situation?
Thomas.
You're shrugging like you're not a human encyclopedia. I mean,
For CONCACAF, AP style for CONCACAF is to use the acronym on first reference. I feel like that one's too complicated for them to spell out.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anyways, let's, you know, while we digested that list, let's talk about. First of all, I want a roundtable vote here. Do you think Jurgen Klinsmann should keep his job, Seth? Just a yes or no.
No.
Thomas.
No.
I do not either. So yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I know. I know you'd think that I would think he should keep his job, but, you know, I would take a USL coach at this point over Klinsmann.
I will add a somewhat cowardly caveat. I wouldn't mind seeing him stay on as technical director, if that's a possibility, if
By
he
the way,
would
that's-
accept that sort of demotion.
That's the name of your new emo band, is Cowardly Caveat.
I think that the Klinsmann staying on as technical director idea is a noble one, because that seems to be the role that he's best suited for out of his two roles. But it's hard to imagine him accepting that kind of a demotion, and it's also hard to imagine a new coach coming in and having the old coach above him.
Yeah, and I think, if I'm being honest, I think Klinsmann is such a polarizing figure in U.S. soccer that you can't really keep him around. It's like saying we're going to go into Iraq, but it's cool. Saddam Hussein's still going to be, I don't know, Secretary of State or something like that, you know.
Steal their oil still.
Yeah, but obviously steal their oil. So,
Yeah.
you know, but you know what I mean. I think you keep him around and it serves really as more of a distraction than anything.
Yeah, it would be like if Trump decided he wanted to keep Hillary Clinton around as Secretary of State.
Yeah, yeah. I think we would all probably really like that, but you know. But yeah, imagine what Breitbart.com would have to say about that. You know.
All right, we're going down the rabbit hole.
Emails.
I do think this Klinsmann stay on as technical director scenario is a pipe dream. I feel like in terms of ego, he would simply not accept that.
That's just
He has a lot of pride.
A narrative that's created so that, you know, bored soccer journalists can write think pieces about that possibility.
Speaking of narratives that bored soccer journalists use, I'm going to bring up another one that we've heard a lot over the last 24 hours, and it's impossible to quantify, but it is interesting to discuss. Has Jurgen lost the locker room? There is one particular instance that I'm thinking of that might indicate yes, and that is Michael Bradley's post-game comments after Mexico. In so many words, of course he didn't come out straight up and say it, but in so many words, Michael Bradley basically indicated that Mexico had a plan for dealing with the U.S. when they moved to a 5-3-2, and the U.S. did not have a plan, and they did not have a plan even when they were in the 5-3-2, and it was sort of up to Bradley and Jermaine Jones actually to get Klinsmann to change that, and so there seems to be some turmoil between the team's captain and the team's coach, and the team's captain is at least willing to go out in public and partially admit that.
A lot has to do with the quality of your players.
And this isn't the first time Michael Bradley has expressed disagreement with Klinsmann. After the Copa America semifinal loss to Argentina, Klinsmann did his somewhat typical thing of going into the press conference and saying, look, we just respected them too much. We need to step on their toes, and we need to not be intimidated by these big stars. I think that's why we're losing these games. And Bradley was asked about it in the mix zone after the game and said, I respect Jurgen's opinion, but I disagree with that. And it's one of those things where even though he stated it in a very diplomatic, respectful way, and it's perfectly plausible for a captain and his coach to have certain differences of opinion, it's a pretty it's a pretty distinct topic there that Klinsmann thinks the main reason for their defeat was this one thing, and his captain completely disagrees with it, albeit respectfully. And now to then have that followed up by Bradley pretty obviously not being a fan of the formation from the first game against Mexico makes you wonder, is there a disconnect there? And if your captain is not on the same page as your head coach, does that trickle down to the rest of the locker room and cause the types of issues we're talking about? Is that causing them to lose the locker room?
Yeah, and I want to point out too, this is right around the same time that the U.S. started to have issues in the last World Cup cycle. When the Brian Strauss piece came out, and there was talk of Jurgen losing the locker room. And what strikes me a lot about this go around is back then, Michael Bradley was one of Jurgen's staunchest defenders, and he was one of the guys saying that it was completely inexcusable and inappropriate for, people in the locker room to be talking to the press in that way, and this and the other thing, So, I think if you start, in the past 2-3 years, he's started to lose even as captain, like you said, which is pretty damning.
I think that also this is part of a general issue in the soccer world. This is why coaches typically don't stay around for 2 cycles, because where in the first cycle their message is fresh and the players are tuned in completely, at this point, especially after some bad results, the players have said, well, we've heard this all before. And you have a situation where Michael Bradley becomes someone who is not one of Jurgen's staunchest defenders when he was before.
Yeah, in the first cycle, he could say something like,
So it's a process?
But I think it's sort of worn thin. He's had more than enough time.
I want to fixate on something Seth mentioned about a minute ago, the formation. You called it a 5-3-2. I thought it was more of a 3-5-2. Klinsmann somewhat inexplicably referred to it as a 3-4-3
after the game, and literally it wasn't just. It wasn't even like a.
Yeah,
it was more of a. He said
he corrected.
Well, it was a exactly.
Yeah, he corrected a reporter's question when it was referred to as a 3-5-2.
Seize the narrative, Jurgen.
And is there? I guess you can't really draw any sort of sweeping conclusion based on semantics of a formation, but what was that about? What does it say? Does it say something that he seems to have a disconnect with what he considered the formation to be and the way the team executed it on the field? Because it did not.
To be honest, I don't have a preferred system.
Good point, Jurgen.
Thank you very much to Neil.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, they came out in a pretty standard 3-5-2 where you have 2 defensive midfielders, Bradley and Jones, an attacking midfielder, Pulisic, and then 2 strikers in front of them, Wood and Altidore. And he seemed to be insisting that Christian Pulisic was playing as a center forward when he very, very clearly was not. So either Klinsmann just has a very liberal definition of his formation, or Pulisic and Altidore and Wood did not play their roles the way they were supposed to. And again, when you're putting together a new formation with 3 days of training with players who've just all come together from all over the world, some of them, despite previous camps, meeting each other for the first time, that type of problem is going to arise.
2 things real quick. First of all, Matt Doyle, if you're listening, please call in 708-LT-OWFSS. Second of all, I want to go to the OY for some soccer voicemail. We put in a request earlier for messages of support for Jurgen. Let him know what a great job he's doing. We did get one. I just want to go ahead and offer a disclaimer that none of us are responsible for the content of this message, because it is in German, and I have no idea what it means. So here it is.
Jürgen, ich glaube, dass wir gewinnen werden.
So, anyways, hopefully that's not hate speech or something. But yeah.
Maybe
Thanks
it's
for the call.
Maybe it's just because that was in German, but that sounded incredibly harsh.
Oh, it sounded extremely dark. I mean, it
Angry.
seems like we should be worried about what that said.
Yeah. He's not happy.
Yeah.
So I want to get into a sort of devil's advocate argument here because.
Is that? Let's see.
Is that Matt Doyle?
Matt Doyle, the MLS analyst, responding to our pleas. Matt, how are you doing?
So
tonight?
quick.
Yeah.
Hey guys, first time, long time. How you doing?
Good. I'm not sure you remember, Matt. You actually called in when you were a guest on this show, which has happened more than a couple of
Got
times.
that one wrong.
Yeah, Matt Doyle is my, you know him as the MLS analyst on single-handedly keeping MLSsoccer.com afloat with clicks and also my Twitter nemesis. Matt, what's on your mind? What's on your mind these days? I know you're a big Klinsmann fan. I don't know. You have any kind of thoughts you want to share with the world?
No, you know what? I'm just kind of like just gonna ride the wave here. I got nothing on my mind. It's just I've reached this sort of perfect kind of inertia as we careen into nothingness, and I'm just enjoying that. Like, do you guys understand that type of like we all are beings of light, and our matter it just like keeps us. I'm just completely out of my mind, dude. This has been the most miserable 10 days of my life. I swear to God.
This is exciting.
Yeah. Pablo Mastroeni apparently is called in as my initial impression of this conversation.
Well, Matt makes a good point. It is ridiculous that we're even talking about soccer, a game that a bunch of grown men play, which is a children's game, when everybody, including yourself, is going to eventually die one day.
This is
right.
Our last episode, I think. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, the sun is eventually going to expand so much it'll encompass something like 40% of the solar system, right? So, and that's us. We're going to get there eventually. So why care?
And we're talking about the difference in formations. I mean,
It is what it is. Cannot change it anymore.
Even Jurgen agrees we're going to die, I think,
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a bummer.
Thank you very much to Neil.
All right.
Hold on. I have one actual question for Matt, because we were going to get into this. And it's especially interesting because, as we know, Matt has not been a big Klinsmann fan for a large portion of his tenure. But, Matt, give me your best reason why Jurgen Klinsmann should not be fired.
Oh, that's a good one. That's like when they asked Trump what, to say something positive about Hillary in the debate.
Yeah.
Matt, give us your best reason why Klinsmann should keep his job.
I don't.
I really hope
I'd like
you
to
say
phone a
that
friend.
You'd like to phone a friend.
you should say that he's raised wonderful children. Jonathan seems like a nice fellow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, man. Like the stuff that I can't kill him for that tweet forever. The stuff that I tweeted when I was 17 was or would have tweeted if Twitter had been around when I was 17. No, look, I don't think there's a good argument for it. I think the only argument you could make is, oh, well, no coach you bring in is guaranteed to turn the ship around. And while that's true, I mean, there are no guarantees in sports. There's no guarantees in anything. What seems to be a guarantee is that no matter how good things look in the moment, Klinsmann is going to keep tinkering and keep undoing any of the positive steps that he takes.
A lot has to do with the quality of your
I think
plays.
everybody kind of realizes that now.
Yeah, Seth.
Well, I would have accepted the answer of whenever I write articles bashing Jurgen, MLSS gets a lot of clicks.
Yeah, I think that's what most of this is about,
That's
right?
true. That's true. He's very. I mean, it's the Les Moonves thing, right? Where he said Trump is bad for America but great for CBS.
Yep.
So,
yeah. Like I said, Matt Doyle, the only thing keeping our website afloat at this point. So it's Matt Doyle. It's like Matt Doyle and Kalen Carr standing in front of a brick wall with graffiti on it. That's what we got going on for us right now. Matt, anything else you want to share? Maybe something a little bit less dark and nihilistic?
I mean, I do want us all to remember back to 2011 and to think about where we were as a program and why we felt like we needed Jurgen in the first place. And I mean, I was one of the people who felt like it was time to change the coach when Bob was in charge, and I gave Jurgen a year of saying, you know what, he makes some weird decisions, but we asked for this, and we got to write it out. We got to see what it is. And before, I think what turned me against him, well, first of all, the players talk. They will tell you what's going on. But second of all, the phone book thing, like realizing that this man was a complete charlatan who had no respect for the team or the players or the fan base, just killed me. But beyond that, it was tough. If you remove Klinsmann from the equation, the worry was, we don't have young players coming up who are different makers. We are hesitant to try new formations or to branch out to different areas in terms of getting players into the national team fold. And I not just national team, but professional soccer. And I think if you look at where U.S. soccer is as a whole, I do think that's improved. And part of it has to go to Klinsmann because he recruited some great dual nationals and some pretty crap dual nationals, but he recruited all of them from mostly Europe. But we have more players playing in Mexico now. We have the MLS academies putting more players into MLS first teams than we had 5 years ago, obviously. It's not just more players, it's better players, and it's guys who have really high upsides. And, of course, we still have the solid core of essentially, kind of white bread college kids that U.S. soccer has been built around for the last 35 years. So even though it sucks right now, and even though we might not make the World Cup and we can't roll it out, I think that we're in a better spot. And as frustrating and as dark a time as it is at the moment, I hope people appreciate that. And I hope whoever the new coach is, if there is a new coach, understands all the different parts of the player pool and is ready and willing to use all of them in a sort of sensible manner.
Matt, I one quick question for you, and then I'm going to hang up on you. What is the from any coach in the entire world, who is your dream U.S. national team successor to Jurgen Klinsmann?
Oh man, probably Conte. I mean, if we could get him from Chelsea, that'd be pretty nice. I'm really impressed with him, but I don't. There's not one guy who stands out, or woman who stands out as head and shoulders better than all the others. You
didn't say Dave Sarakin.
Dave Sarakin.
Dave Sarakin.
No, not Dave Sarakin. So Dave's a good guy and I think a pretty decent coach. So we'll see what the future has in store for him.
Matt, it's always a pleasure to hear from you, even when you're clearly intoxicated and clearly in a really bad place in general. I'm just gonna say this. I've been sitting in my living room listening to Willie Nelson all day, if you know what I mean. So. That sounds like most days to me. So I appreciate it, Matt. Take care of yourself, and it's always a pleasure to hear from you.
Thanks, guys. I like you all better on Twitter.
All right, Matt Doyle, pleasant surprise. Shouldn't really call it a surprise because I asked him to call, but
breaking news from Twitter. The voicemail in German, apparently, according to the wonderfully named Poopy Rhino Pickle on Twitter.
I don't know if I trust Poopy Rhino Pickle.
Poopy Rhino Pickle tells us that the voicemail said, "I believe that we will win."
Wow. So you're an apologist, scared to speak in English, even, delivering messages in code to Jurgen Klinsmann.
Calling from Germany, so I can only assume that it was a relative of Jurgen's.
Well, so let's talk then real quick in the next 5-10 minutes just about who could actually right this ship. And I think, I read a good Stephen Goff piece today just made the point that this is, if the U.S. is going to change coaches, it has to be now, the next month or so. Obviously, the 4-month break.
January camp to bring in your players that you want to look at.
You just can't afford to lose 2 more games. Let's run through some potential candidates. Who is the first name that always comes to mind is Bruce Arena.
Well, I think that Arena is the ideal candidate at this stage because right now, halfway through a qualifying cycle, you're not looking at somebody to rebuild a program. You're looking at a stopgap. And that's why I think an option like Oscar Pareja, for example, probably isn't the right one right now. You're not looking for somebody to overhaul the entire program.
But I feel like what you're suggesting is that they need to go ahead and hire an interim coach.
No, not an interim coach.
Well, then they need to think a little bit harder about their long-term plans and identity. You know what I mean? I feel like you know exactly what we're going to get with Arena. He's the ideal candidate to just plug in for the next 8 months, year, whatever. Make sure this doesn't end catastrophically, right? But you'd like to think that the U.S. is thinking bigger than Arena.
Right.
Well, when you say
you're
8
wrong.
months, are you envisioning a different coach than taking them to the World Cup after they qualify? I feel like if they hire Arena, it's not an interim coach, but you're signing him to like a 2-year deal.
I have no concept of what time is. Jesus Christ, I don't know.
But I think there's a difference between perceiving him as an interim coach and saying, Arena, we are signing you to a 2-year deal to take us through the next World Cup, and then we're going to look at more enticing long-term options who can reshape the program. An Oscar Pareja, maybe a Jesse Marsh. If their teams in MLS get back on track, guys like Peter Vermes and Caleb Porter and Greg Berhalter all have interesting cases as well. There are a lot of different names. Chad Ashton, for one.
Yes. Yes. Well done. Well done.
So,
Thomas Floyd.
This is the only room in the world that appreciates a good Chad Ashton reference.
All right, 6 Degrees of Rochester Rhinos. Chad Ashton, but you have to exclude his tenure at DC United.
Wait, didn't we do this already? He played with Jason Kreis in Dallas, and then Jason Kreis coached tons of people on NYCFC who were then teammates with Ethan White, who's teammates with John McCarthy on the Rochester Rhinos.
All right.
Yeah.
Just like that.
But U.S.
6 Degrees of Rochester Rhinos, Pep Guardiola, excluding his coaching career.
Oh, God.
No, this one's pretty easy, I think.
How far did he play with Ronaldinho?
I didn't know there was a phone a friend portion of this,
my knowledge is... Okay, if he played with Ronaldinho, then he played with Kaká, and Kaká played with...
Jason Kreis. Coached by Jason Kreis.
Kaká played in Orlando with... Who should I go to?
Louis Neal.
Played with Kevin Alston, who played in New England with Luis Sofner, who was loaned to the Rochester Rhinos.
What the fuck is wrong with who the fuck is Luis Sofner?
He was the third-string goalkeeper for New England when they were in the MLS
feel like
Cup.
You could just be making this up at this point.
Luis Sofner was the third-string goalkeeper on New England, and they have a partnership with the Rhinos, so they loan players to Rochester.
Thomas Floyd.
So Thomas, I got some bad news for you.
Oh.
As much as I loved your Luis Sofner reference, but Pep Guardiola stopped playing for Barcelona in 2001, which was before Ronaldinho's.
Quote, I love your Luis Sofner reference.
He did.
This is something that Thomas has heard on countless OkCupid dates.
But Pep Guardiola was... He was.
I love your Luis Sofner.
Yeah,
reference.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't overly knowledgeable of Pep Guardiola's playing career. He did manage at Barcelona. He was a part of their management team when Ronaldinho was there. So that's, if you allow that, it stands.
Yes, that is true.
Anyways, back to the task at hand, I guess. Who are some
the replacements?
Yeah. I still think, I get what you're saying, Thomas. 2 years doesn't exactly, but it still to me feels like an interim tag. You're saying you get us to the end of this World Cup cycle, and then we'll go from there. And I guess that is that tends to be the mandate with every coach at the international level, right? But something just feels a little bit different about this, and part of me wants them to. I don't know. I guess I'm just being unrealistic because really, what sort of big name or who's going to institute a different style when you have literally like 2 months to find a new coach?
Yeah, and I think, Paulo, actually you're making a good point because I guess I'm looking at the job more in a overhaul the program type sense, which is a Jurgen Klinsmann kind of manager / technical director. But most national team coaches are guys that just get their players together when they're there, try to put them out there in the best possible formation, and try to win, and that's it. It's not a full-scale program overhaul, and in that case, there are a lot more options you can look at.
I'm going to take a quick detour for a viewer question here, a listener question. Thoughts on the NASL final? I'm going to give you three quick thoughts. Thought the game was borderline unwatchable. I thought it was... Yeah. I thought John Bush skying a penalty kick. And first of all, I thought John Bush taking the third penalty kick was incredible. And then I thought him skying the penalty kick was more incredible. I think Jimmy Maurer should be an MLS goalkeeper. I'm not just saying that because we share the same name. And congrats to the Cosmos, who I always pay attention to and sort of keep a keen eye on all year. That's what I got.
I flipped on that game for about 5 minutes, just kind of stumbled across it, and as someone who has not really followed NASL this year, the moment of realization when I saw that John Bush is still playing soccer was fantastic.
He's got the sweatpants going now.
He's got the sweatpants fully. I think he saw the look from that, who was it, Hungarian goalkeeper in the Euro, and was like, that really worked for him. I'm going to make this a thing for all 40-plus-year-old goalkeepers.
Yeah. John Bush, probably the only player in that game older than me. Things got real sad there. Anyways, give me 2 other potential candidates. One. Each of you, give me one. Somebody you'd like to see brought into the U.S. fold, other than Bruce Arena.
Well, we talked about him, but I do think Oscar Pareja is the most enticing option within the MLS pool. The way he thinks big picture. I think he's a guy who would be useful in terms of the U.S. coach's role in shaping the technical direction of the program. I think he's a good game management coach. He really has a knack for finding unique combinations and formations and putting players in interesting positions that almost always works. We've seen some exceptions. Their first leg against Seattle in the playoffs was one, but overall, that was him operating with a team that has lost its 2 best attacking players. So I'm not going to blame him too much for that.
Also,
I'm going to focus on the Supporters Shield he just won.
Also, somebody long term who probably would be good for the development side of things. U.S. Soccer has a pretty proven track record at Dallas of playing as kids and homegrowns, so.
So there are other players. Seth, who do you have in mind?
I am intrigued by Pareja for sure. I do think that Peter Vermees is another good option. Kind of flown under the radar the last couple of years because Sporting Kansas City seems to be treading water, but that doesn't necessarily mean that his stock has dropped as a coach. He's gotten Sporting Kansas City in the playoffs every season, and he has managed to get the best out of players like Benny Feilhaber, like Graham Zusi, like Matt Besler up until this season.
Luis Soffner.
Somebody who is familiar with the U.S. national team program and somebody who was generating interest apparently from some overseas teams in the offseason, so you can see that it's not just us in the U.S. that are taking notice. So I think Vermes, not a huge overhaul kind of guy, but he has a system out there in Kansas City, and it's a high pressure, high pressing kind of system that I think if implemented with the U.S. could be effective.
I saw this point made, I forget where, discussing actually Jesse Marsch, but it was
4-4-2. I read that too.
Yeah, it applies to Vermes as well. When you have a coach who has a very specific system that really requires players to completely understand their role in that system and to be coached in a certain way that makes them a fit for that system, particularly in terms of the fitness required to be on a high pressing team, it might not work on the international level. And I feel like that could be a point against guys like Vermes and Marsch who have these specific systems, because you don't have control over the fitness levels of these players. You only get them in camp for a few days at a time. And if you're really leaning on a system like that, it might not work. Yeah. The other part of this discussion that interests me is if you're a U.S. fan, do you start to think about the players who kind of are in Jurgen's doghouse, who suddenly would be given a new lease on life? Like, imagine Darlington Nagbe getting a fresh start under Bruce Arena, or even Benny Feilhaber's getting up there in years now, but maybe he's a guy who'd be back in the national team fold, and there'd be a certain level of excitement around that. Landon Donovan? Not
yeah,
really.
Or just guys, guys in MLS. Like if you talk about a guy like Chris Pontius, who probably you feel like under Jurgen would probably never necessarily get a shot, but maybe under a new coach, fresh slate, just sort of look at the big picture as a whole. Somebody like that might get a call in.
Or
comeback player of the year, Chris Pontius. Sorry.
One guy that immediately comes to mind is Dax McCarty too.
Sure.
I feel like last night against Costa Rica, if you started Dax McCarty instead of Jermaine Jones, it would have gone way better.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, there are a lot of players who Klinsmann has never, for one reason or another, given a chance. Eric Lehigh. I feel like Eric Lehigh, based on the level he's playing at and the consistency with which he's playing, should make him absolutely a candidate for getting outside back minutes with the U.S., considering Michael Orozco got into a game against Mexico in World Cup qualifying as a left back. You're starting Matt Besler at left back. A player like Lehigh you'd think should be in the picture. Granted, I'm not watching a lot of English second-tier games, but the fact that he's not even in these camps, not even getting opportunities, is a bit of a head-scratcher, and there are just a lot of players like this who you wonder, will Klinsmann be able to ever implement these guys, or are their chances completely done? I know for someone like Feilhaber, they certainly are, unless a new coach comes in. And is that another plus in favor of potentially making a change to try to get some of these disenfranchised players back into the picture?
Some of our listeners suggest names like Torres, Villafana. I don't know. I mean, there are lots of guys, we're well over time here. I think we're at an hour and 7 minutes. You guys have anything else, anything of substance you want to share before we pull the Ethernet cable out of this laptop? Seth, any thoughts? See, this is how you end a show smoothly.
Yeah.
You say, we are going to end the show now, and then you ask the other people if they have anything to say.
Yeah, we can't all do it like Jerry Springer. And now my final thought.
Guys, the world is coming to an end. We're all going to die.
Why are we even talking about soccer? I've mentioned this during Matt's call, but I suppose it was an eye-opener.
SoccerBot, I think Really had it right. So, guys, we'll see you next week or in a month or, whenever we do another show.